Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with another Hot Commodities episode. Today since probably final draft weekend of fantasy season, we are coming at you with our top 10 strategies for redraft fantasy football this year. This might be more suited to a novice player, but I think any veteran player of fantasy football can learn something from this as well. So we're coming at you with our tips, our tricks, some of the strategies that we incorporate in fantasy all the time and specifically this year. So Danny, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Again, as you mentioned, these are our top 10 strategies for the season, things that you can kind of have to guide you when you're attacking your draft. Because let's be honest, when you're first attacking your first, draft, two drafts or so, when you're new into the fantasy football mindset, it is pretty intimidating. I mean, like you don't know, oh, well, I heard of this guy's name. Like, what do I do? Do I take him here? Yada, yada. Oh, when do I take my quarterback? When do I take my kicker and defense? All of that stuff is going to be discussed in today's video. So I'm super pumped to get that out for you guys. But just glad to help everyone, right?
Yep, for sure. So we're going to hit the intro and then we'll get right into it. All right, so the first strategy, and this one I speak from experience because I've done this before, and that's don't load up on rookie running backs and expect them to be the centerpieces of your team in the draft. All right, so this year we're going to exclude Clyde Edwards-Helaire because he's a first-round pick and he's got all the opportunity in front of him. But the past 2 years, let's look at the rookie running backs and I'm talking specifically non-first-round picks, so no Saquon, no Josh Jacobs. These guys were expected to come in right away and be contributors. We're talking about Sony Michel, actually he was a first-round pick too. Sony Michel, Ronald Jones, Royce Freeman, Rashad Penny, Kerryon Johnson, David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, Darrell Henderson, and Devin Singletary. Those were like the top drafted running backs the past 2 seasons. And with some of those names, despite the fact that some of them were just straight busts, a lot of those guys took a while to get acclimated to the NFL. Sony Michel took a couple weeks before, I believe it was Rex Burkhead and James White were the two guys in the backfield when Sony Michel was drafted. Ronald Jones had a horrible rookie year. Royce Freeman took a while before he actually lost his job to a undrafted free agent, Philip Lindsay, that year. Rashad Penny never really overcame Chris Carson yet, even his entire career, let alone his rookie year. Kerryon Johnson, it took him a while to get past LeGarrette Blount. David Montgomery, week 1 came out and Mike Davis was the starter. Miles Sanders, took him till like Jordan Howard got injured before he was like a valuable fantasy contributor. I mean, Darrell Henderson, never really became the guy. Devin Singletary also took him a while to overcome Frank Gore. So all of these guys took a couple weeks, if not longer, to develop, yet they were top 4-round picks in most of these cases in fantasy drafts. So don't assume by week 6 that your team will be elite because you have 7 rookie running backs and they'll all be workhorses by week 6. Sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. And if you want to go after a DeAndre Swift, if you want to go after a Cam Akers, if you want to go after Jonathan Taylor or J.K. Dobbins, I would suggest that you pair them with veteran running backs that you can start until you know that those guys are every week starters. So if you want to grab a Jordan Howard, a Matt Breida, Kerryon Johnson, Adrian Peterson, Sony Michel, Mark Ingram, any of these guys that you know at the beginning of the season, they're going to be the feature backs of their offense. Maybe they're not the feature backs the whole season, but you know at least while DeAndre Swift or Cam Akers or whoever you have is developing that you can start or flex Jordan Howard or Matt Breida until that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I agree there as well. Again, as you mentioned, you do want to mix in upside, so you can take 1, 2 of these guys.
My point is not to count on them. If you're going to take
that's what I was going to go into.
Make him your 3rd running back. If you're going to
100%.
Same goes for Akers and Swift for Dobbins and Swift right now. I would say make sure they're bench guys for you, not even flexes. I would want them to be a bench player for me.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was going to say. If you get one of those guys, realistically. And as you mentioned, those low price veterans such as Mark Ingram, Jordan Howard, Matt Breida, guys like that you can pair with them to get you through the first few weeks. Again, as you mentioned, don't just expect that by week 6 you're going to win every single game because in reality, that early season does matter. So you want to mitigate your risk in pairing those high upside rookies with solid, steady guys to put in your RB2 flex spots. But yeah, no, I definitely agree there. Definitely riskier options, but again, as we mentioned, like you mentioned, Swift and Dobbins as not being relied upon early on. But if you do have them and you're able to mitigate the risk and you're able to get those wins in those first 5 or so weeks, as you mentioned, they're going to be league winners down the stretch. So just make sure if you take one of them, you need someone to be able to play in your flex on your RB2 for the time being,
Yeah, if
because
your RB2 is DeAndre Swift, you're in trouble. Like you need at least for the first 6 weeks of the season, I would say you need someone like Jordan Howard or Mark Ingram or something that you can, like in our redraft listener league. I paired Jonathan Taylor with Mark Ingram because I know Mark Ingram I can use for the beginning of the season. Maybe by week 9, Mark Ingram is in a split backfield with J.K. Dobbins, but at least for the first 4 or 5 games, I know that Mark Ingram is the lion's share running back in that backfield, and I can wait until Jonathan Taylor overtakes Marlon Mack, which I expect to happen probably of all the rookie running backs the soonest. I think Jonathan Taylor is the guy who beats out his backfield.
Maybe aside from like Cam Akers.
Well, yeah, because Cam Akers doesn't have any competition right now, so
Yeah.
maybe not Cam Akers, but between Swift, Dobbins, and Taylor, I think Taylor
I agree with that
first.
Yeah, I think if I were to rank in terms of like the soonest to get like really good fantasy point production for your team, I would say Taylor, because I do think he will dispose of Mac within the first few weeks. The thing with Swift, I would have said earlier, like
Yeah,
I would have said
I would say
Swift,
he's in the same
but
boat as Taylor.
with the injury, he may take a couple weeks to get fully acclimated. So maybe say Taylor gets acclimated by week 3 or 4, Swift by week 4 or 5, simply because the injury concern that we do have with him in the preseason. Still love him season long, and then finally with Dobbins, again, Ingram's still there. That backfield's going to be split regardless, so I think it's going to be a little longer for him. But down the stretch, I mean, you talking about week 7, week 8, week 9 on, like this guy could be a league winner for you if you get him at value. So definitely like those selections. So I'm actually going to go into my first strategy, and it's one that's affected me personally. It's one that you have to take into consideration when you're drafting your teams, and that's be adaptive to your draft. Do not just pigeonhole yourself and, round by round, I'm going to go RB, wide receiver, quarterback here, tight end here. Like, you don't want to do that. You want to adapt according to value with teardrops. Because, I mean, crazy shit is going to happen in your draft. Every year, an unanticipated drop will happen that catches you off guard. What if you're picking at, we'll say the 212, and you're like, I'm definitely taking a running back here. I'm definitely taking a quarterback here. And then Julio Jones falls to you there. What are you going to do? You're going to take the value of a guy like Julio Jones because, again, you draft based on tiers, not based on players. And if you're looking at it plain and simple, like you have to be able to adapt on the fly, sticking yourself into a design plan simply because that's how you want to like pigeonhole position by position. It's just how you feel in your draft. Don't draft by quota, draft by value. And if you're getting guys to be able to fall to you at value, don't be hesitant in taking them. That's my main thing here.
Yeah. And I think if you're doing mock drafts and you're finding, like you mentioned, picking at the 212, like say you're picking Christian McCaffrey in the first round, and every time the 212 comes along, your options are like, you have no running backs left. Like it's like a tier drop off at running back. So you're looking at guys like Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins, and your mid draft and Aaron Jones is sitting there. Like, don't just because you did that in mock drafts and you got Chris Godwin and DeAndre Hopkins at the 2-3 turn, pick Aaron Jones if he's ranked higher in a tier for you. So again, being adaptive, not pigeonholing yourself. And I know you've heard us talk about the fact that we want to leave our probably 2 of the first 3 rounds with 2 running backs, but that's based on where we're picking. We know at the end of the first round, you can get that without having to succumb to like reaching for guys or sticking to a set plan. But I totally agree. People who want to go into drafts getting running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, running back, like that. There's no reason you should ever do that because you're going to miss out on if you have 2 receivers already and your set strategy was that you're going to get a receiver in the 5th round and fucking, I don't know, whoever you like in the 4th round slips there, you should pick them like at running back. So yeah, 100%. Not pigeonholing yourself is definitely a big deal.
That also has to do, I'm going to mention it later on in terms of running back strategy, but it always will depend on your draft slot. If you're picking at the 101 and you're locking up a guy like Christian McCaffrey, you're 1 or 2, you're locking up a guy like Saquon Barkley, you can tend to say, well, you know what, if the RB value is not here, I'm not just simply going to start RB in the first 2 out of 3 rounds. Like you can afford to take a different position there. Whereas if you're at the back end of the first and you're able to pair 2 of the top 14 guys, in my opinion, that is an optimal strategy, like in my opinion as well. But anyways, in general though, you just got to make sure, as myself and Bush were saying, you have to be adaptive. You have to pick on the fly because in reality here, for example, you're in the 6th round and you don't want to take a tight end here. You're saying, oh, I'm just going to go late options. And like Zach Ertz falls to you at the end of the 6th round. Like, are you going to pass on him just because you're set in taking a late tight end? No. And I'm going to get into that too with the tight end strategy later. But take it away with your second biggest strategy, Bush.
Yeah, so I have these in a different order, but I'm gonna go by like kind of general strategies for fantasy football in general. So I'm gonna start with this strategy, and this is get your guys and trust your gut. I hate when fantasy analysts say draft based on value all the time. Like, because like an analyst telling you that ADP is great value, like, oh, getting Todd Gurley in the 5th round is great value. Like, when the toe hits the leather, ADP doesn't mean jack shit. If you don't believe in Todd Gurley, like me and Danny, don't pick Todd Gurley. I don't care where he falls. I wouldn't pick Todd Gurley if he was a 7th round pick. Why? Because I don't believe in him this season. I think he's going to be terrible. If you get Jonathan Taylor, for example, maybe he's one of your guys, you really believe in Jonathan Taylor, and you pick him at the 205, and he's a top 5 running back, no one's going to give a shit that you reached on him. Like, no one cares, because Jonathan Taylor, if you believe in him and you think he's the guy to own in the Colts backfield and he's going to be the next Nick Chubb, the next, like, whoever running back you think he is, then he's worth that pick. Obviously, this is within reason. Don't go taking Zach Moss in the 4th round because you really believe in Zach Moss, but don't be afraid to take him in round 8 or 9, despite his 12th round ADP, because if he becomes a top 20 running back, who cares that you reached 4 rounds on him? And again, at late rounds is, and Danny will get into this more, but late rounds is when you want to be doing stuff like that. So this also applies too for not letting value determine who you pick. Danny mentioned value, but also don't let it deter you from picking someone that you like. So if you are in round 3 and DeAndre Hopkins is on the board, and I'm not a fan of DeAndre Hopkins this year.
Neither.
So if DeAndre Hopkins is on the board and you're caught between picking Adam Thielen and DeAndre Hopkins or DJ Moore and DeAndre Hopkins, I would take both of those guys over DeAndre Hopkins because I actually believe in their outlook. Aside from the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is a great value because he never slips to the 3rd round, I don't really care, to be honest. Like, I really believe in Thielen and DJ Moore this year, so I'm not – if you're obligated to feel like you need to draft based on value, then you've just played yourself, because the reality is ADP is determined by public opinion and draft analysts. It's not determined by who's going to be better or who's worse. So the last thing, too, with this is gut feeling. Sometimes you have a gut feeling about a player. You think he's not going to be good this year. You can't really explain it. Maybe you can a little bit, but – I got him about certain guys too. Kenyon Drake I have a gut feeling about Kenyon Drake. I don't think he's going to be the featured workhorse of the Cardinals all season. He could be maybe for the first 5-6 weeks or so, and I could look like an idiot, but I don't think Kenyon Drake is going to be very good this year. I think he's going to bust and disappoint people. So regardless of our analysis too, if you don't believe, we've been pounding Austin Eckler down your throat all off season. If you have a gut feeling about Austin Eckler and you think he's going to be terrible, then don't draft him. Don't draft him just because your favorite analyst says he's going to be super good. If you have that gut feeling about Josh Jacobs or Austin Eckler or Julio Jones, like whoever you think is going to have a down year, just don't draft that player. Don't feel like you need to draft players based on value because they slipped to you. It's like instincts, gut feeling, and getting your guys and doing your own research trumps all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like that is bang on. Again, as you mentioned, we're here to guide you guys. We're here to give you a leeway, to give you a path to making your own smart, analyzed decisions. We don't want you guys to just take our rankings and go strictly off that. View the information that we provide to you guys and make an informed decision based on what you guys know, what we're telling you, and what you're hearing from other people. Because in reality, nobody's going to be 100% right in fantasy football. Being able to make informed decisions based on the information available is always going to be the optimal strategy for you guys. Again, Bush was mentioning just taking a guy because his ADP is 3 rounds higher if he's there, when in reality, I mean, that's just not going to be the case, as Bush mentioned. For example, he mentioned he wouldn't take Gurley in the 7th round. I'm fully on board with that as well. I actually had a similar situation in a home league about a few days ago. You guys know I'm all the way out on David Johnson. You guys can watch yesterday's video to see more on that, my top 5 busts. David Johnson, similar scenario, fell to the 7th round. And I still didn't take him there because I had another guy that I like better than him. Plain and simple, like that is a real life scenario, real life situation where, oh, maybe according to ADP, I should have taken him, but I don't believe in David Johnson, so I'm not just going to take him because a consensus says that I should. And another scenario in terms of gut feeling, guys that you feel like are going to outperform their ADP. A couple of years ago, Kareem Hunt was a rookie. And that was right after Spencer Ware right down. He started getting the backfield. We all heard the rumblings of Andy Reid. So he was kind of – his ADP rose from like the later rounds to 4th, 5th round area. I believed in him so much. I took him at the end of the second round. People are like, oh, wow, you reached on him. Ended up finishing as the top 4 back. So was it a reach?
No, exactly. And
You
that
guys,
was my point with Jonathan Taylor because like no one knows what's going to happen. So if you really, really believe in a guy, and again, within reason, don't take Zach Moss in the 4th round.
yeah, don't do
But
that.
like if you really, really believe in a guy, then go get your dude. Like if that's how it works. And I also suggest, and Mike wrote this up in his on the loadedboxpodcast.com, Mikey, our dynasty guy here, he wrote this up saying have a guy in the mid rounds that you're attacking. And up until today, that was Ronald Jones for me, rip. But just have guys like that because those are the type of guys that can win you leagues. Because as we're going to mention with a later point, the first 4 rounds, you're getting the foundation of your team. After that, you're getting the kind of breakout players and the sleepers and all that stuff. So, Danny, what's your next strategy for the viewers?
All right, for sure. Yeah, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but that is generally getting your RBs early and avoiding the dead zone between rounds 3 to 7 because I'll get into it. Sorry. Get your RBs early, avoid the dead zone, and then target ambiguous backfields late. So it's no secret that on a fantasy football team, I mean, your top end running backs are going to be the engines that drive the success of your team. Again, drafting stud running backs like last year, if you pick Christian McCaffrey, the years before, if you pick Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson, all those guys in the years past were the engines to championship teams. Drafting these stud running backs to anchor your team becomes crucial because once the top guys are gone, a huge drop off in production is experienced at the position. For this year especially, again, we've mentioned it multiple times. You guys can check out our rankings videos. There's about a tier of the top 14 or so running backs that are so far ahead of the rest of the field that the goal should be, again, we mentioned at the earlier portion, if you're picking 101, 102, you can lean away from it, but the goal should be in the first 2 rounds being able to pair 2 of these guys. So while, of course, again, you got to adjust for value. Like if you're looking between Kenyon Drake and freaking Devontae Adams falls to you on the board in the second round, obviously you're not just going to take Kenyon Drake because he's a running back. No, you still got to draft on value, but realistically, if you have a receiver and a running back value pretty closely, I would lean towards locking up the running back position because of the scarcity aspect. The reason being, by doing this, you avoid the RB dead zone between rounds 3 and 7, where historically it's just not on their side. I mean, we can point to what even happened last year. If you actually look at the finishes of 2019, for example, the mid-round running backs selected that year between rounds 4 and 7 were Melvin Gordon, Marlon Mack, Phillip Lindsay, Tevin Coleman, Miles Sanders, Duke Johnson, Darius Geis, Darwin Thompson, Latavius Murray, and Austin Eckler. So there's about a 30% hit rate there. And when you could have had guys like Chris Godwin, Tyler Lockett, Robert Woods, Kenny Galladay, Julian Edelman, Cooper Kupp, Mike Williams, Tyler Boyd, and Josh Gordon, which is actually an 80% hit rate if you actually compare them. So ultimately, the reason why we say pound running backs early is A, they dissipate real quick, and B, the wide receiver depth between these rounds, as I mentioned, 80% hit rate versus 30% hit rate. It's just plain and simple. So there's such a disparity when you're looking at it as well. These running backs in the dead zone, what is really the the decrease in risk between them and later options? Like late round running backs you can get that I'm fine with personally compared to like some of the mid-round running backs would include guys like Zach Moss, Boston Scott, Chase Edmonds, Damian Harris, Jerick McKinnon, and Anthony McFarland Jr. We're all going in rounds 9, 10 plus that you can get and feel just as comfortable with getting as those guys who are being taken in the same range as some of those top receivers. You're looking at receivers in that range being like DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin, Marvin Jones, Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller. All those guys are going in the same range as these dead zone running backs. So why would you take a dead zone running back ahead of them? That's my thing. So take the receivers in that range and just get a similar risk running back later on, and you still end up with a stud receiver talent where you could have had a similar running back, right?
Yeah. And you kind of stepped on my point, but the next point we're going to talk about is weight on receiver. And the reason is because Danny mentioned the scarcity of the running back position. Think about it. How many teams in the NFL have 2 every week starters at running back in fantasy? Like maybe 3 per season. Like maybe. Like the last like really good example I can think of this was 2017 with Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. Like usually you're getting 1 running back and the rest is kind of just like maybe you throw him into your flex spot and hope he gets you 10 points. Like receiver wise, there's 16 NFL teams that have 2 startable every week fantasy receivers. and there's probably 5 teams that have 3. So aside from the top 4 guys, in my opinion, in ADP at the receiver position, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, and Julio Jones, the way of the volume hog number 1 wide receiver, which Tyreek Hill isn't even one of those guys, that existed in the early 2000s with guys like Andre Johnson and Randy Moss and Megatron and Marvin Harrison. These type of receivers are slowly fading away because offenses are more spread out. They move guys around more. And in general, the infusion of talent at the receiver position, this past receiver class in 2019, this receiver class that we just had in 2020, and next year's receiver class make it that most teams are going to have 2 or even 3 fantasy relevant receivers on a week in and week out basis. And that requires you to be able to play matchups much easier, where instead of having, like the Colts are playing the Bengals, I can only play Reggie Wayne and Marvin Harrison. There might be like, you can play fucking Stokely and like whoever else, right? Like these good matchups, you can attack 2 or 3 pass catchers from one team, as opposed to like 10 years ago when it was just like Marvin Harrison that you could play consistently. So there are legitimately, and I'm not even exaggerating here, 40 guys in the NFL this year that could finish as wide receiver 2s in fantasy. Anyone from Juju at ECR 12 all the way to Darius Slayton at ECR fucking 44. Attack wide receivers in the mid rounds 3 to 7 ideally is like the hot spot for receivers, because after like I would say probably the Texans receivers and like Darius Slayton, Deontay Johnson, it does start to get a little bit questionable. But
yeah.
And some people's like objections that they might have to taking receivers early is that they're more consistent than running backs. And that really is just like straight up not true. Like the consistency argument only applied to Michael Thomas last year. Like literally Michael Thomas was the only guy that busted like less than 20% of the time. And 2 years ago, it was only Devontae Adams who had that. So, I mean, there's probably 2 to 3 to 4 or 5, maybe 6 running backs that bust a similar amount of times as the top receivers. So Debo, Parker, Metcalf, AJ Brown, DJ Moore, Robert Woods, Stephon Diggs, like DJ Chark, all of these guys went after round 3 last year. These were all mid-round receivers. And I didn't even mention like Chris Godwin too. Like all these guys were all like mid-round receivers that ended up either being wide receiver 1s, top 5 receivers. Maybe they were just wide receiver 2s that you could count on. It's much easier to identify a breakout receiver as well. A breakout running back requires opportunity and oftentimes injury to become a breakout running back. A receiver, Cortland Sutton, for example, last year didn't require any injury to anyone in his offense. He was there producing while Emmanuel Sanders was still there before he was traded. So all the neglect probably about taking receivers early this year is for a reason. It's because the running backs are scarce. It's not because some random fantasy analyst said take running backs early. We all just agreed. Like, no, we all agree that is the optimal play this year because of that. I know you said 14, 15 running back drop off after like the mid-second round.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, after those 14, 15 guys, realistically, the receiver value just outweighs the running back value. Again, if you're picking at the 101, you're probably not going to get one of those running backs anyways. So if you take like a DJ Moore and a Travis Kelce, or a DJ Moore and a Lamar Jackson, okay, that's fine because you have Christian McCaffrey to be able to supplement that risk at the running back position. Again, it's scarce, but I mean, Christian McCaffrey is just a different breed compared to those top 14 guys. But in general, as you mentioned, and I mentioned, that RB dead zone between rounds 3 and 7 are because all those running backs are getting pushed up because of the scarcity, to the point where you're getting guys that usually go in round 7, round 8, or going in round 5, round 6 now because of the scarcity issue that is going on. And plain and simple, if you're taking a guy in round 5 or 6 when you could have a DJ Chark, you could have a Terry McLaurin, you could have guys like that, Michael Gallup, Stephon Diggs, guys in that range that are just so much safer options than the running backs available. Why would you take the running back there? Like, plain and simple, it's just an optimal play. Take the receiving talent when it is available to you. But segueing off of that, I'm actually going to get into the tight end position now. So my thing at the tight end position is you're either going to draft them early or you punt them and you take them late. The only exceptions to the mid-round tight end would be that Waller, Ertz, and Andrews here, simply off value, but I'm going to get into that. So again, similar to running back, I view the tight ends as to all being all in on it. So Kelce, Kittle, or punting it with those few exceptions. So to start, Kittle and Kelce are just the kings of the position, plain and simple. And for valid reason, both are absolute monsters that are genuine game changers in a general messy position slot on your roster. Plain and simple, the tight end position, if you don't have a good one any single year, it's mostly a mess because it's so hard to find guys that are actually going to be able to contribute in that slot to you. So you want a producer in that slot. So again, if those two guys are able to slip to the end of your second, early third rounds in your draft, I mean, snatch up the value. Again, I mentioned those top 14 running backs and top 5 or so receivers. After that, I'm perfectly fine with taking a tight end if I have to in the second round, especially when you're buoyed by a top running back like a CMC, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, because that's basically where the value would be aligned. So again, I mentioned the upper middle class, as we like to call it on the channel, being Mark Andrews, Zach Ertz, and Darren Waller. At the current, if you have to take them in the third, fourth round, I'm out on them there. But if any of them slip to like late round 5, early round 6 range, I am intrigued with that value. So again, while Andrews and Ertz are currently coming off the board at ADP of 43 and 47 respectively, so the 307 and 311, which I would be out on, Waller is the one that especially intrigues me because he is most likely to slip. His current ADP is 64 or the 604 off the board. That is incredible value on him, and I would perfectly feel fine with parting with that mid-round pick and that mid-round tight end philosophy if a guy like that is available. However, after those top 5 guys are gone, punt the position. Avoid the Evan Ingrams, the Hunter Henrys, the Tyler Higbees, the Rob Gronkowskis of the world. Lean toward later guys. Again, you can get guys like Hayden Hurst, Jonnu Smith, Chris Herndon that are going later on that have similar risk and similar upside. So why would you just spend a mid-round pick on a tight end when you could get a really good like Marquise Brown where you're taking Evan Ingram versus taking a late tight end? You can get one of those guys. And if you go with Evan Ingram or so, you would be ending up getting a receiver like, I don't know, Emmanuel Sanders. Would you rather have Evan Ingram and Emmanuel Sanders or Marquise Brown and Jonnu Smith or Hayden Hurst? Plain and simple, just go with that value there. And in your home league, I mentioned guys like Hayden Hurst and Jonnu Smith. Those are typically guys that you can get really good discounts on because simply put, the casual fan doesn't really know these guys before they actually have production. So again, Hayden Hurst and Jonnu Smith haven't really per se broken out yet. So they can go under the wraps because simply they don't have the names of guys like Rob Gronkowski. People might know Taylor Higbee because of his good stretch at the end of the season. They'll know Hunter Henry. They'll know Evan Ingram. But those guys, Hayden Hurst, Jonnu Smith, you could get in round 9, 10, 11 and still give you incredible value and similar value to those other tight ends, as I mentioned. So again, segueing the point, get the position early if you can get them at value. Genuinely avoid the mid-round guys other than that upper middle class, as I mentioned. And if you're able to snag late-round targets, guys like Hayden Hurst, Chris Herndon, and Jonnu Smith are optimal plays. So definitely like that strategy at the tight end position.
Yeah, I have no disagreements there. The middle class is a wasteland. It was a wasteland last year with guys like Eric Ebron and Hunter Henry and guys like that. It's just not worth taking guys like that when you can get a guy in the 12th round with similar concerns and the similar upside to those mid-round guys. So speaking of a position, I don't really play in too many leagues that have these positions anymore, except for my main home league that still has this. And that's wait till the very end of your draft to draft a kicker or a defense, or don't draft one at all. So for a defense specifically, here's why you want to wait until the end of your draft, because they change drastically year over year. Last year, if you look at the number 1 defense was New England Patriots, and they were by far the number 1 defense for the first half of the year. This is who they lost in the offseason. Jamie Collins, Kyle Van Noy, Donta Hightower, Patrick Chung, among other people. And this happens every year with the top defense. They lose some players. Maybe their defensive coordinator gets a head coaching job or whatever. Like, they're usually not – it's very rare that a defense finishes like 1 and then they're like top 3 the next year. It's constant like changeover and all that stuff. So unless you hit on a defense like that, like the Bears in 2018 or the Patriots last year or the Jags in 2017, then you should be streaming defenses every week based on matchup, because unless you can hit on a defense like that, that's an every week starter, gets turnovers constantly. You're really just looking for a defense to get you like 8 to 10 points. So you look for guys that are playing Jameis Winston, defenses that are playing Daniel Jones, defenses that are playing Sam Darnold, Ryan Fitzpatrick, like these quarterbacks that are prone to turnovers or are just bad offenses in general. Instead of drafting a defense or a kicker early, what you should be doing is taking a handcuff or a super high upside receiver, because you never know. Like Le'Veon Bell could get traded next week, and then all of a sudden, fucking Frank Gore is actually really valuable. He could be like an RB2 or whoever else is there. Like we just saw, Leonard Fournette just got released. If you had drafted a defense, you might not have taken Raquel Armstead at the end of your draft, or Chris Thompson or Devine Ezigbo, whoever you like from that backfield. So I would suggest not picking up a defense or a kicker until you absolutely have to, which is right before the kickoff of Thursday night football or Sunday afternoon games. Like, just wait, hold a guy on your bench, because you never know. Someone could get arrested, someone could fucking get cut, someone could get traded, and then all of a sudden you might have a potential league winner. Someone who drafted James Conner at the end of their draft a couple of years ago probably had a league winner when Le'Veon Bell decided that he wasn't coming back to the NFL that year. So wait till the second to last round to draft your defense if you have both, and the last round if you only have defenses. And then kickers, yeah, like you're streaming kickers basically just based on matchup, high scoring games. Defenses, you're doing the same thing, but in reverse against bad quarterbacks and bad offenses. So you're really only going to see value from drafting a defense highly if they become like an elite every week starter. And that's very, very difficult to predict.
Yeah, 100%. Again, if you're in, like, for example, a platform like ESPN forces you to draft a kicker and a defense, those are the last two designated rounds for your draft. Don't be getting cute, say, oh, well, the Niners or the Pittsburgh Steelers defense in the 9th, 10th round, well, they're going to outproduce every other defense, because plain and simple, like, that is just a waste of a pick at that point. Yes, they might be the number 1 or 2 defense, but you know who could be a really good, valuable receiver or running back option in that range? Guys like Zach Moss. Guys like, we'll say Darius Chase Edmonds. Guys in that range where, like, you could just take a defense and stream matchups in the last round of your draft or second last round, as Bush mentioned. Like, plain and simple, don't invest a ton of capital into the kicker and defense position. So, or better yet, just get them out of your leagues in general.
Yeah, that's another part of way to solve that.
Yeah, for sure. So going into my next point, it's you generally want to wait on the quarterback position. Again, there's another one that simply comes down to tiers of players, in my opinion. So in a lot of your home league drafts, Mahomes and Jackson will likely go in the end of the first round, round 2 area.
We're talking specifically single quarterback leagues, just for the record now, but also in a super flex league. I don't know if you stand by this. I generally like middle class guys in a super flex league too. So, but yes, specifically a single quarterback league, you generally want to wait on quarterback.
If it's a super flex, take the value on those guys in that second tier behind Mahomes and Jackson, in my opinion, because there's like a 3 or 4 round discrepancy between them. And or in a super flex, you're going closer, but in a 1 QB, I'm actually going to get into, there's like a 3 or 4 round discrepancy. So you can get one of those guys at a value instead. That's pretty nice, but we'll get into that. We'll talk about a super flex video soon enough, but this is specifically for the 1 quarterback leagues. So anyways, Mahomes and Jackson are typically going in rounds 1 or 2 in your home leagues. And the next tier of Prescott, Murray, Watson, and Wilson will most likely be picked anywhere between round 4 to 7 or so, probably in your home leagues near that round 4 or 5 type range. And at those values, again, just take the value at other positions, as the tier differential between the top wide receivers and running backs versus the top quarterbacks is significant in terms of points per game. A crazy example I can bring to you right now actually is in general, for reference, the same difference between Christian McCaffrey and the RB2 Aaron Jones last year on points per game was 10.2 PPR points per game. That is the same differential between the quarterback 2, Dak Prescott, and quarterback 23. So keep that in mind. The opportunity cost of taking a quarterback over the top options at other positions is significant. So you generally want to build your cores at RB and wide receiver, or possibly, again, as I mentioned at the end of the second, you can get a top tier tight end in late round 2, if possible, rather than taking one of the quarterbacks. And the one thing I'm going to say is this is mostly dependent on roster construction and value. So if I'm picking 101 and I already have Christian McCaffrey, and then I get a stud RB wide receiver like a DJ Moore at the end of the second round, given the tier drops between the top 14 running backs to the field and the top 6 or so wide receivers to the field, I would feel comfortable taking a Lamar Jackson to add to another elite player to CMC. And he could be an optimal play over taking just another middle-class running back or wide receiver instead. Again, I would take the 2 tight ends above the 2 quarterbacks, but if they're both gone and you can compare, you compare like a CMC with a Lamar Jackson, I'm fine with doing it there, but that's only at value. And as I mentioned, with the other 4 names being the Watson, Wilson, Dak, and who am I missing there? Kyler. The same applies for them. Generally in rounds 4 to 6, I'm not taking any of them, but if any one of them slips to round 7, and I'm staring
usually Watson.
I'm going to say I'm staring at, let's say, Deshaun Watson versus Will Fuller or Tariq Cohen. So according to Fantasy Pros Best Ball ADP, they actually all are 7th round picks right now. I'll opt to take a guy like Deshaun Watson that has a realistic shot at finishing as the quarterback 1 in that range any day of the week. So it all depends on your value. If you can get one of them at a value, I'm not pigeonholed as saying avoid the quarterback, whatever, just take a late round guy. But don't be spending up on these guys because simply put, their value compared to the other positions in that sort of area is just not there. So yeah, get them if they fall at value though. That's my
Yeah.
thing.
And this is super league dependent, I would say, because you really have to know when your league is picking quarterbacks. Because in my league, for example, my home league, quarterbacks do go a bit earlier than they would in like an experts league or whatever. So though that tier of quarterbacks you mentioned might all go in round 4. Maybe one of them slips to round 5. And then the next tier of quarterbacks, the Matt Ryans, the Tom Brady's, the Carson Wentz's, and like those guys are going in round 7, 8 instead of rounds 9 and 10 like they would be in like an expert league or whatever. So know your league. Make sure you're not left without any quarterback. If everyone in your league drafts 2 quarterbacks in a single quarterback league and you're stuck with fucking Teddy Bridgewater as your QB1, you're probably not going to be in great shape. So make sure you don't miss out on any like huge runs if they're happening, because that'll just leave you kind of stranded and behind. But yeah, generally, if your league waits on quarterbacks, then I would say get maybe 2 to 3 guys that you're willing to take at value. For me this year, it's Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady, and Matt Ryan. Those are the guys that I'm actually willing to take relatively early compared to like the other guys. But then after that, if I miss out on those guys, I'm waiting till Gardner Minshew, till Joe Burrow, till Ryan Tannehill. Like I'm waiting all the way to the QB 18 to 20 range. So again, yeah, generally wait on quarterback is a solid philosophy because as Danny mentioned, the difference between the quarterback 4 and the quarterback 20 is really not that high. It's not that much. It's way bigger of a difference between the running back 4 and the running back 20. So you're better off going
100%.
For those positions. So the next point I want to get to, and this one is really, really important in my opinion. This one is probably the one that can lose you your league the easiest, is don't draft risky players early. If you're going to take risk, do not do it in the first 3, maybe 4 rounds. So the guys that don't bust in these ranges are typically the guys that end up on a lot of playoff rosters, a lot of championship rosters. Last year was guys like CMC, guys like Derrick Henry, guys like Michael Thomas, guys like Travis Kelce, even Dalvin Cook, who got hurt, is someone who was on a lot of playoff rosters because he was very good for the amount of time that he did play. So take Travis Kelce, for example. He doesn't get hurt. He's in an elite scheme. He has an elite quarterback, an elite offense. If you're caught between someone like DeAndre Hopkins, who I mentioned I'm not a big fan of, and Travis Kelce, which I've actually been faced with this decision in a draft before, my advice is to favor a guy like Kelce or whoever in that mix you perceive to be the safer option, because some of the riskier players can ruin your league. They can ruin your season. If you miss on your 2nd and 3rd round pick, you're fucked. There's like, even if you have McCaffrey last year, if you drafted probably Juju Smith-Schuster and I don't know who was like a 3rd round pick that busted last year, James Conner maybe, like I don't know.
Sure. I mean, or if you're at the 1-2 turn, you ended up with Odell Beckham and Juju.
Yeah. Like if you had 2 guys like that and they busted, you probably did not win your league. If you did, you probably had some super lucky waiver wires and shit. But some of the riskier players this year that I'm avoiding early just because they're going too early for me to like actually be in on them is Dalvin Cook, who I mentioned because of his injury concerns and the potential holdout. Kenyon Drake, who I don't want him at all. DeAndre Hopkins, who changed teams and he's got the chemistry issues. Todd Gurley, who just sucks at football. David Johnson, who just sucks at football. And Chris Carson, who's got injury concerns. So those are like the main guys that I'm avoiding early in rounds because I think those are the dudes that can lose you a fantasy league. Maybe one of them, maybe 2 of them win you a fantasy league, but I think it's far more likely that those guys lose you one. And then some of the safer players, I would say, if you're caught between some of these guys and another one of these guys, is Zeke Elliott, Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Allen Robinson, Adam Thielen, and then the 2 tight ends. Like I think those guys are like really safe options that if you're caught between a Chris Carson and an Allen Robinson, my advice, take Allen Robinson because Allen Robinson is a far safer pick.
Yeah, I know. I fully agree there as well. You want to mitigate risk, you want to mitigate risk in those first 3 or 4 rounds as possible. Because let's be honest, if you're picking in those first 3 or 4 rounds, a lot of those players are going to be stud cogs in your lineup. So why would you take one that has a chance of maybe busting more so than another option, like as you mentioned, Ezekiel Elliott versus the Dalvin Cook? If they're both elite running back options, why would you take the one with more question marks? Plain and simple, it doesn't make sense to me.
Especially for those 2, like what's the difference? Dalvin Cook might finish as the RB1, but Zeke will be at a RB3. Like, was it really worth that risk? Like, 100%. I don't think so. The difference between a guy like Zeke and Dalvin Cook is like, I know Zeke's going to be a top 8 running back at his floor.
Minimum. Oh,
like top 5 probably more realistically. Like Dalvin Cook's floor is like he plays 2 games.
Yeah, like Zeke in his career, literally 4 years on a points per game basis has literally been RB2, RB2, RB3, and his worst finish on a points per game basis was RB5. Like that is just straight
Yeah.
consistency cog in your lineup type material. But as you mentioned, again, early rounds, mitigate the risk. That's actually segueing into my next point is while you don't take those risks in your draft early, make sure you take some upside shots later on because there's definitely players to be had later on that may be a little riskier, but if they do hit, could give you league winning type upside. So again, late rounds are meant for guys that have high upside to eventually crack your lineup. If you need them for a week, they actually have the ceiling to be able to produce you a league winning type week. Don't take guys like Larry Fitzgerald or Cole Beasley in the late rounds just because you know that they're probably going to be, I don't know, safe if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
Rounds 10 plus, especially targeting ambiguous backfields, as I mentioned, potential breakouts and players with boom type upside, like a Deshaun Jackson, for example. He may get hurt very well, but
He will get hurt, probably.
Probably, but his first 3 or 4 weeks, especially if Rager is out, like he's literally got top 15 upside in any single one of those league or weeks. So even if he does get hurt and you take him in as your 10th or 11th round pick, and he's able to get you wins in those first 3 or 4 weeks, I don't care that he got hurt.
If he gets you 4 games where he scores like 10 plus points and then he gets hurt and doesn't play a game for the rest of the year, you spent your 11th, 12th round pick wisely because the chances of Golden Tate, if you picked him there, giving you 4 games like that where you felt comfortable starting him and he got you more than 10 to 15 points is probably like Golden Tate might do that 4 times this whole year.
100%. So again, if you're actually looking at why you want to chase upside, common examples for myself personally over these last couple years, if you just want to look at it, 2018, would you want a guy like Cooper Kupp and George Kittle? 2019, would you want a guy like Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson? They were all guys going in rounds 10 plus in 2018 and 19 respectively. They were all unproven at the time of their drafts that ended up giving you league winning type upside. That's what you got to chase at the later portion of your draft because ultimately, as we've said multiple times, don't settle for 4th place in your league. Shoot for first. Those type of upside shots later on are the type of guys that can take you over the top. So that's my philosophy. Again, mitigate risk early on, as Bush mentioned, take those upside plays later on because ultimately they're going to give you league winning type upside.
Yeah. And ultimately too, the goal of your bench is for them to become starters, not for you to like keep them as bye week fillers. Because especially if you're in a shallow league, like an 8 or a 10 team league, you can get Golden Tate off the waiver wire and start him if you absolutely have to. You can get a guy like that who can fill in if you have like 3 guys get COVID right before a game or some shit. But a guy like J.K. Dobbins or something, for example, you pick J.K. Dobbins because you want to eventually be able to start J.K. Dobbins. You don't want to have a bunch of guys on your team that are all kind of the same and you have no idea who to start week over week. If J.K. Dobbins cracks your starting lineup, he's probably there to stay.
Yeah, no, 100%. If J.K. Dobbins at some point this year is able to crack your starting lineup, that's not going to be as an RB 25 to 30 type player. That's going to be, if he's in your starting lineup, he's probably going to be at that point a locked and loaded top 15 running back, plain and simple.
Yeah. And those are the type of guys you want. You don't want to be being like, on all the fantasy podcasts asking the questions like, who should I start? Should I start Deshaun Jackson or should I start Jamison Crowder? Or should I start John Brown? Like all these guys are kind of similar and like really depending on the matchup or one big play here and there could honestly sway it either way. So
format as well.
Guy like Michael Pittman Jr. instead of fucking John Brown, because if Michael Pittman Jr. hits, he might be the number 1 receiver on his team.
Yeah, plain and simple. And we saw what the number 1 receiver on his team was able to do over the last few years. So we're both high on Pittman, by the way. Make sure you get him at value because he's still going criminally.
I still get him in like every single league.
Yeah, same, easily. But anyways, anything else you want to add on the video, or should we wrap this up? Because
no. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope if you're a veteran fantasy football player, you took something from that. This was kind of geared towards people who are just joining the channel, just tuning into fantasy content now. As we're recording this, guys, it's a week from football. I'm fucking excited as hell, and I hope everyone else is too. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the button that looks like this. Leave a comment down below. Hit the subscribe button if you're new. Hit the bell icon if you want to see even more stuff from us and be notified at any time we post a video, because they usually come up at janky times. We have busy schedules. We can't get them up at 9 a.m. every single morning. So without further ado, guys, take it easy and enjoy your Thursday.
Yeah. Peace out, y'all.